All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Peace be upon you all. And I would like to welcome the Faroos here on Finding Truth. He has been pretty generous to come and share his ideas about some debates and discussions I have had lately with different persons. So, Faroos, assalamu alaikum and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you. Yeah, I know that you've been trying to get me to come back on for 6 to 8 months now, 6 to 9 months to discuss, these things. But I took a break after having another baby. So, that baby's about eight
Oh,
months old now. So I feel a little more
mashallah.
comfortable than I did for a
Mashallah.
while.
ما شاء الله. So مبارك يعني hope he is great in dunya and akhirah inshallah.
Thank you.
Okay, so what do you have to tell us today? What do you have in
So
mind?
Yeah, you've been in many dialogues and debates. I know in the past you asked me to come on and have a discussion on your debate with the apostate prophet. I said, inshallah, in time. Then you asked about, Matt Delahanty and inshallah in time. And then you did with David Wood and Naria. And then you had a discussion with David Wood. So what I did is I watched all four of them and put together a presentation on, just not every word of the things, but just points I wanted to discuss and analyze.
Great. So for those who are watching and who didn't have a chance to look at these debates and discussions already, you can actually find their links in the description. And maybe we'll put your presentation now on the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So we can go to slide one. Or I'm
You
able to
can
control.
actually, yeah, you can actually flip it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the first one, we're going chronologically backwards with the most recent one. So most recently, you had a one-on-one discussion with David Wood on his channel. And my overall impression before we get into more details, it's a general, is the first I was impressed with how respectful he is towards you. And I've actually noticed that with a lot of not just him. I noticed that when you debate had discussions and debates with apostate prophet, with Matt Delahanty, Naria, they all seem to be very respectful towards you in ways that sometimes I don't see that same level of respect with some other of the people in the Dawa scene. But you and maybe one other person, I see a lot more respectful interactions and dialogues. So I was impressed by that. The thing that I also noticed is that David seems to take an abrogationist model of Quranic Jesus, where you lean more towards a contextualist model of Quranic exegesis. And, we'll get more into what they are. But that was my overall impression.
Yeah. Yeah. I think for your first point, maybe many persons who are into da'wah uh, should think of the person in front of them, with husn dhan, and even high hopes that Allah maybe opens his heart or something. You're going into a debate. Maybe you hope that Allah will open the person that you are debating or discussing with. Maybe that Allah will open his heart. And I think maybe when you take this disposition, it just creates a sort of a vibe or something that makes things more peaceful. Maybe. Yeah. The second point, yes, and the problem with David is that he says, okay, this is the final thing that came to the Quran chronologically, so I am not going to look at anything else. So I think this was rightfully the pillar or the axis that the discussion went around. Yeah.
So I just wanted to go into the abrogationist approach. So the abrogationist approach it attempts to chronologize, I mean, put in time order for the verses of the Quran and use the later verses to cancel out the earlier verses. Now, this is not just David's approach. It was a popular approach amongst Muslims, especially from around the 900s to the 1700s of the Common Era. And it's now, I would say, the most popular approach amongst evangelists and atheists, critics of Islam, some academics as well, though it does seem to be losing favor in academia.
Wow. I'm glad that you reached out to this, because I don't know, I feel that still many in the modern age are advocating too much for abrogation. So I hope maybe that this reaches to some other people to really look into what you're explaining now. So thank you for all this research, really.
Yeah, and my personal opinion is, as I lean more contextualist like you, I actually think that abrogation should be the last resort, not the first resort. Meaning that, like, if there's two conflicting meanings and you can't harmonize them, or there's no way, then at that point, last, not first. I think some people jump to it first, and that provides problems, and sometimes it makes some rulings not make any sense.
Yeah, and my personal experience, so I spent some time with the abrogation matter at a point of time, because I really wanted to reach to a resolution to it, and I keep looking to places where people just use abrogation by default, and really I resolved that there is like something like 1, 2, or 3, and the rest you can really go contextual. So, and even we can even have a discussion about those 1, 2, or 3 places, really. So yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. Keep it as the last resort if you cannot find anything else. Yeah.
So the origin of the abrogationist approach, I know you don't like the numbers, but I do. I think the difference is you're used to speaking for a Muslim audience, and I'm used to speaking for an American audience. So
yeah.
But these two ayat or verses of the Quran have two general interpretations. So a legal interpretation used by abrogationists and a creedal interpretation used by contextualists, and we'll get into what that means later in the presentation. Now, the contextualists read these same verses and come up with a different conclusion. So the contextualists believe that 2:106, chapter 2, verse 106 refers to the Quran abrogating the Torah, and that chapter 16, verse 101 means that when a verse was abrogated, that verse no longer appears in the Quran, not it's still in there and abrogated. Maybe, I don't know if you have access to pull up, or you have this memorized, if you wanted to just.
Yeah, so Surah 16 is Surah Al-Nahl.
Yes.
And it says وإذا بدلنا آية مكان آية والله أعلم بما ينزل قالوا إنما أنت مفتر بل أكثرهم لا يعلمون. And if we replace one ayah instead of another ayah, in lieu of another ayah, and Allah is more knowledgeable of what He brings down, they would say, you are but a fabricator. And then He comments, وَالْأَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. No, the reality is the majority of them do not know. So this is where you are referring that it means that abrogation comes in the form of completely removing an ayah and putting something in its place. And this is the kind of abrogation that would refer to the Quran. So if something is abrogated, you will not find it at all. And then that will mean that the other ayah of 2106, which is Surah Al-Baqarah, which is ما ننسخ من آية أو ننسها نأتي بخير منها ومثلها. We do not abrogate an ayah or cause it to be forgotten unless we bring another one that is better or similar to it. And then, since also the context of Surah Al-Baqarah is talking about Bani Israel, and then at a point of time it says تلك أمة قد خلت, this is a community that has gone away, then the context already lends itself that he is talking about the ayat of Bani Israel, of their holy books that were now overridden by ayat of the Quran. So yeah, I think that this is an important approach to consider, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the problems with the abrogationist approach, and actually the abrogationist approach by Muslims now, I'm not even speaking about the abrogationist approach of David. And so I'm going to be I'm getting reference from a book, Principles of Islamic Jurisprudence by Dr. Muhammad Hashim Kamali. And I do think that, if there was one book on Islam in English that I would advise, Muslims and non-Muslims to read, it would be this book. It's not a simplistic read. So, if you don't have a high vocabulary level, you may need, a dictionary by it. I mean, I didn't have a problem with it, but I do know other people who have. So I just want to say, but Kamali points out, and he quotes from hundreds of classical sources, like throughout the book. So it's not just him making this up. There's no unanimous agreement on which verse abrogates which verse. So that provides a problem right there. And then there's no unanimous consensus on the chronology of the Quran. And that, provides a problem with abrogation, because I might say this verse came first, and you might say that verse came first. And if we can't agree, how do we know 100% who's right?
Yeah.
And you might say this abrogates this, and I'll say, no, it doesn't. They're two completely different situations.
Yeah, and it actually brings to my mind the fact that, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ وَإِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We have surely brought down the dhikr, which refers to the Quran, and surely we are going to preserve it. So I think that any aspect of the Quran that becomes essential to the understanding of the Quran needs to have a certain status of preservation that will not lend itself to causing too much dispute, and the exact times of which ayah came down versus which other ayah, and sometimes a complete surah. Was this ayah Makki or Madani, or maybe in between, etc., etc. I think at the end of the day, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has caused an ayah to be fixated in the Quran, then this ayah has to have use until the end of times. And hence just saying abrogated all the way is really a huge loss of value that is, I don't know, pretty unjustified in my opinion. So yeah, this is one more great reason that you're indicating here that makes us look with a grain of salt to the matter of abrogation and keep it as the very last resort, for sure. Yeah.
So now here's the problem with the abrogationist approach I find by non-Muslims. So every non-Muslim I've seen use this approach, whether they're evangelical, evangelists, whether an ex-Muslim, whether they're atheist critics, they utilize the abrogationist methodology for exegesis, but at the same time, they don't believe that hadith are reliable historical sources. They don't believe in the four Sunni schools of law are reliable historical sources. They don't believe that the tafsir literature represents the period of the writer more than the period of the Prophet Muhammad. But the abrogationist approach came to us through the process of hadith, through the process of sirah, through the process of the madhabs, through the process of tafsir. So if you don't believe they're trustworthy and reliable, then how do you believe their conclusion on abrogation is reliable when the list of the abrogated and verses that people use comes after the Hadith collections? It comes after the Sunni schools of law, and it comes after the Sirah and Tafsir, literature. I mean, the Sirah and Tafsir literature has been, ongoing, but it came after a lot of these major works. So if you believe something that came later is more reliable than something that came earlier, I don't understand how people justify that unless it's just what suits what you already think. Confirmation bias.
Yeah. A great point.
This just reiterates what I actually just said. And it's basically a logical incoherence in stating that you don't trust the source, but you trust the conclusion of the source.
Yeah.
Like if I said Ahmed's a liar and everything Ahmed said is a lie, but then start quoting Ahmed as my truth, like there's something missing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Even between the schools of jurisprudence itself, you cannot take a piece of a fatwa based on one piece of evidence according to one school and the second piece of evidence according to the other school, because the principles of jurisprudence might sometimes be not consistent. You need to build things in a consistent way to reach to a consistent decision. Let aside if you do not take the whole thing altogether.
Yeah, they had differences in their methodologies. They had differences in the way they graded hadith. They had differences in the way they applied hadith. They had differences, they had differences in even sometimes exegesis. So now the contextualist approach, all legal verses of the Quran are valid based on the circumstances. So they might not actually be valid in 1920, but might be valid in 2120 because, we don't know, all the details of the future. In a contextualist approach, a pure contextualist approach, no verses are abrogated. And then each verse came for a particular situation and is applicable if the situation it occurred in happens again.
Yeah.
Now, on any topic in the contextualist, you place all the verses of the Quran next to each other regarding the same topic. So it's like you don't take one piece of the puzzle and say the whole puzzle. You put all the pieces together, when you're doing a puzzle. You look for the textual context and the historical context, and then determine the legal implication for each context.
Yeah.
The contextualist approach seems to have been popular during the first 2 centuries of Muslims, and has begun to revive from the 1700s to the present. So both have existed, and both have been more popular at different times. The contextualist approach is favored by now many academics in the West. They also use something called the historical critical approach. And sometimes their conclusions will agree with the general Muslim conclusions, general conclusions of Muslims, and sometimes they won't. It doesn't mean because they use this approach it's right or wrong. I'm just, mentioning, this.
Yeah.
Now, 9.5 was constantly brought up by the people who use the abrogationist approach. Now, Muhammad al-Ghazali did a tafsir of the Quran, and this is a translated quote from him. The allegation that 120 verses on the invitation to Islam were abrogated by the verse of the sword is in fact one of the crassest stupidity, and only serves to show that the great number of Muslims are in a stage of regression of either knowledge or intelligence in our time and have become ignorant of the Quran. As a result of this ignorance, therefore, they have forgotten how to call to the way of God, how to facilitate the call to Islam, and how to be proper examples, and how to present a good perspective. Perhaps this is the reason for the failure and the propagation of Islam and the prolonged stagnation of the Islamic message being affected, for it has been assumed that the sword is that which fulfills the obligation of delivering the message. Such a concept is, by the agreement of all those who are rational and discerning, totally absurd.
Wow.
Now,
Very strong.
Yeah,
very strong.
He goes a lot stronger than I would. I mean, I would have been a lot more gentle.
Yeah.
I might not have said this is stupidity and absurd and all this other stuff. I wouldn't have made some of those harsh. But this is his opinion. But it's important though that we put, like, if you notice, never have I denied in this talk that abrogationism doesn't exist, or that abrogationism isn't an exegesis of the Muslims. The difference that I believe is putting all the information on the table and then letting people choose based upon the information, not just putting whatever supports what I agree with and leaving out whatever I disagree with.
Yeah, absolutely. However, what Imam Al-Ghazali is saying is actually very insightful, because if you just take one ayah and you just totally ignore a plethora of ayat, a complete lineup of ayat that are talking actually about what the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, has done. 13 years of his life, for example, in Mecca, and many years of his life in Medina, and you just make the whole thing very concentrated into what was the case after Fath Mecca, after the conquest of Mecca itself. What does that say? It says that if those ayat were brought down while the Prophet, peace be upon him, was in Mecca, he would have fought with Quraysh right at the beginning of the da'wah. Does that even make sense? I think what Al-Ghazali is saying here is that using this extreme way of abrogation can cause a Muslim da'i to do things that are totally counterproductive to the da'wah itself. If you are a Muslim missionary or a Muslim trader who is just gone now to East Asia or to Africa or to a new country, and you don't realize that you are there representing Islam with good deeds and with good manners and with good ethics, etc., then you lose the whole point of da'wah. I think this is what he means, and this is maybe why he is using this strong language.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that.
Yeah.
So to conclude this subject, abrogation and contextualism are two approaches towards exegesis of the Quran. Now, if you notice, I said two approaches. I didn't say one's right, one's wrong. I said there are two different approaches. So to be honest, you have to put them both out there. There is a spectrum of Quran interpretation ranging from extreme abrogationism to extreme contextualism and everything in between. So I would put Muhammad al-Ghazali closer to the extreme of contextualism. I put some of the people who, state that like 9-5 abrogates everything, on the extreme of abrogation. And then you're going to find people on those two extremes, and on not those two extremes, throughout the history of Islam and even today. I live in the United States of America, and in America, we have right wing and left wing in politics, right? So we got the far right and the far left, which are both loony. And then you have, but they're the people who are the loudest and most forceful in their voice. And then you got most of the people, you
In the
know,
middle.
yeah, they can agree with some things on the right, they can agree with some things on the left. But like the people on the far ends, they have like talking points, and then they have to agree with 100% of the talking points on their side, even if their methodology they might like is opposite. Whereas the average person, I think, can go in between right
Yeah.
wing and left wing ideas, and that's just like that. I think the average Muslim can go through contextualist and abrogationist ideas.
Yeah.
Um, there is no one agreed upon way amongst all Muslims, and that's important to note whenever we're talking about ideologies. You know, Islam. I try to extend the same towards Christianity, Judaism. You know, even atheism technically is a position on one position, but they'll have areas where they disagree upon. And any fair discussion or critique on Islam should present the various sides and let listeners choose what they agree with.
Yeah. You know, I once I listened to this statement from one Muslim scholar, and he said this: the Quran is the highest authority in Islam, and if you would take one ayah to be abrogated, that is, you will deactivate the effect of this ayah on the Muslim conduct or Muslim jurisprudence altogether. You'd rather get this fatwa from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because something like this is at that level of importance that the Prophet himself would have had to say it himself. This ayah should not be used anymore. It is abrogated. And if we apply this simple rule, we will end up with very, very few ayat that we can rightfully abrogate. I think it's a very logical rule and a very simple rule. So, for example, it reminds me, for example, when the ayah of Al-Baqarah that was talking about being accountable for what you think came down, and then the Sahaba came to their knees and they said, well, Prophet Muhammad, this is very difficult to us. I'm narrating with the meaning here. And then the next ayah came, which is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. And the like. So it is obvious from the riwayah of how the ayat came down, and there is a hadith, and the hadith is, you can verify it, that you see here how abrogation can come into the picture. And if you look from this approach, you will find very, very, very few ayat where the meaning of abrogation can apply. But even in this ayat, for example, in the example that I've just given, still we are actually accountable for things that are only acts of the heart. So actually, even the second ayah that says فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم, for example, or لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها إلى آخره, they don't actually abrogate being accountable for what we think of, because, for example, envy, hasad, for example, does not translate into an action in the real world, but it's still an action of the heart and only on the mind. And we know that we are accountable for hasad. So even when you take this approach, there will still be a little bit of contextualization, even in this case. But it's I think it's a thought that is worth also considering for people who are watching this, to really consider what it means to completely abrogate an ayah, and to really find an example with something completely abrogate. I think it's extremely difficult.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So the next thing that I noticed that came up during the talk was, and it actually goes back to the first point I brought up about how the dialogue between the two of you was very respectful, and the dialogue between you and a number of people has been very respectful. So the discussion of the Dawa guys came up. Now, some are very confrontational, and what I've noticed though is confrontational sells on social media, and not just for the the Muslims, the Christians, the atheists. So those who are like the most confrontational and yell the most and try to belittle, they get the most views, the most ratings, the most, comments. And so I think what this does is it encourages this type of behavior. Right.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so I actually believe that many of the Dawa guys started off sincere. And then once people start making money, they begin performing for an audience. So I actually did a video. I'm not going to play it here, but like I will link it in the comments, after the show.
Yeah, I can actually link it in the description, even if you'd like. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, more people click on the confrontational videos over the academic videos, then the algorithm promotes them more. So, this is something do on your own time, not you, but the audience. Just do a YouTube search, because I've done this myself. Put comparative fiqh in the search and see how many views. Put itqan in the search.
Yeah.
See how many views, see how many people view these videos. I saw, put usul al-fiqh, see how many people viewed. All right. So, I mean, I saw one comparative fiqh series where I literally was the only view.
Oh,
yeah.
too bad.
You had a sheikh doing a class online. And, I was the only person to view it. Right. But, someone acts like a cartoon character for Islam, and they'll get like, a million views, 100,000 views, this, that. And so my personal experience with some of the Dawa channels is I've been told by some, that they won't collaborate unless I get a certain number of subscribers or a certain number of viewers. And my thing is, if you're doing it for Allah, the number of viewers and subscribers, shouldn't matter.
Yeah. 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 It strikes me while you're talking that at a point of time, Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be upon him, only had few viewers in Mecca, only had like 5 Muslims around him who really listened to what he was saying. And then 10, and then 13. For a very long time in Dar al-Arqam, there was just few people. And so it didn't really matter then. It doesn't matter now how many people are really listening. It just matters actually how many are the truth of what you're saying, and then the how many will come later. And yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I didn't realize. I thought you're done cutting them. One of the things also is that just because someone's popular now doesn't mean they'll be popular 5 years from now. And someone who's not popular now doesn't mean they won't be. Now, I personally don't see myself ever, being on that super popular level, because I know what it takes to get there is to be confrontational and, to, put others down and put myself up, and, but eventually a lot of the people who do that, they get, the people turn on them and act the same way towards them that they acted towards others. So, I'd rather try to do the right thing than do, what sells.
Yeah, right. And actually, I noticed that on the comments of some of those debates that you mentioned, some people are actually putting comments, whether on the debate channel or my channel or the other side channel, pushing everybody, hey, why are you not shouting at each other? And it was really strange. And another thing is that sometimes I watch videos for some days. Some of them can be popular, and the video is just only himself, saying something. So, like, for example, you're coming out of one of your videos and you're saying something, making a reply about something, or even just explaining a topic. And at the end of it's like a 5 or 6 minute, at the end of it, maybe the last 30 seconds, he's actually literally shouting. Why are you doing that? There's nobody to shout at, but it's like becoming like a kind of style that if what you are saying is true, maybe you'd better be saying it in the louder voice possible. While the sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, Sayyidina Muhammad, is that he didn't do that. He was not sahab. He was not somebody who was, like loud and shouting, etc.
Yeah.
This was not his attitude. Yeah.
And what's interesting, because if you were to do it like a debate or a discussion or a talk in a traditional academic session, I wouldn't say modern, because the modern ones are starting to go crazy.
Yeah.
But like it would be based upon, facts, evidence, and points, whether, I don't say one, because, who wins a debate is, usually there are people come with their mind made up. So for example, if you and I were debating hypothetically, there are people who are already on my side, but no matter what I say, they agree. People on your side, no matter what you say, agree. Then there are listeners who are in between. But I find that the people who are more likely to leave comments are the people who already have their mind made up in the first place.
Yeah. You're right. Absolutely. But there is this minority who are coming there without a mind made, or a smaller even minority who would actually switch sides. And maybe those would not leave a comment, but those are the real ones that are the prize. These are the ones, inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give plenty of good deeds of hasanat. And we only need one person to go to Jannah to make use of anything that we've said. Set aside just communicating the truth is enough, but maybe if all of us would think of this, it's not about your audience telling you that you won, or the other person's audience telling him that he won, because they'll say that anyway. It is if you have communicated the truth in the best way that will open people's heart or not. This is the whole point.
So I remember you and I met through the Arn Ra Quran studies show, and I went on there twice. And the first time, I mean, I didn't go do full episodes, just the time I had. But I know the first time I had mentioned the whole talk we did earlier about contextualism versus abrogationism, and it asked me to bring back my points. And then when I did, every time I tried to say something, someone, not Arn, because Arn kept saying to let me talk, but every time I tried to say something, and then the people in the comments were saying, see, they're not letting them get away with any of that BS. They're not they're not letting a person state, they're not really arguing against the point. They're trying to stop the point from being said. And now I notice that it's not just, I notice this happens on all sides. Atheists, Muslims, Christians, ex-Muslims. There are people out there who take this approach, but yelling over a point and name calling. I notice, I didn't get called any names on that show, but I'm just saying I see this as a common thing. Is generally just proof that you already lost, because
absolutely.
You don't have to if your point is right, you don't usually have to. You don't need to resort to name calling, right? If I can demonstrate that the freezing point of water is 0 Celsius, if you tell me it's 10, I don't need to say, you fool, you stupid 10, blah blah blah. No, all I got to do is just show you, okay, look, we'll put it in a freezer that's 0 Celsius, and then we'll put it in a thing that's 10 Celsius, take it out in 24 hours. And you'll see, right? You don't need to go through that. So
absolutely.
So now this next one is kind of my opinion, and I could say that I'm not God, so I can't say who's sincere or not. But I do think that there are signs, just like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, taught that signs of hypocrites, signs of iman, signs of lack of iman, kind of as a guidepost for us, because we can't go and say then, okay, that person has these signs, therefore they're a hypocrite. That person has these signs, therefore they're iman. They're outward signs. So I notice when some Muslim YouTubers start out, like they speak, they collaborate, any Muslim who wants to dialogue with them, they'll speak on a variety of topics, and then they get famous. And I find once people get famous, they go one of two routes. So those who are doing it for the sake of Allah,
Yeah.
they'll collaborate with whatever Muslim asks them, regardless of the size of their platform. And they'll generally choose a Muslim collaboration over a non-Muslim collaboration. Now, this doesn't mean they don't collaborate with non-Muslims, but like they don't prefer. Like there are some that go like chasing non-Muslims. You know, please do this dialogue with me so I can give you the dawah. And it's really just someone with like millions and millions of viewers. And I'm not saying that they don't want to give them the dawah, but like why are you chasing someone, let's say, with 100 million viewers or 20 million viewers, and then saying to the Muslim with 10,000 subscribers, you don't have enough for me.
Yeah.
Like there's something missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know, did you want to comment on that before I?
Yeah, I think I think this thing that's missing is that this YouTube thing and this social media thing is sometimes deceiving, and after some time, if one does not really take care of what he is doing, he is like he is counting views and counting subscribers as if he is counting hasanat, and they're two distinct things. They're two totally different things. So I think here it is a matter of quality versus quantity, or truth versus fictitious things. So it at a point of time, if you are going to a platform and advocating the truth, and the platform gives you penetration or gives you exposure, but you are unable to communicate in a proper way, you'd rather not be there and communicate in a proper way with a Muslim, or with somebody who would let you communicate what you want, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. And so the point is, we need to be focused on the objective, which is communicating the truth in a way that will cause people to listen to the truth and understand what we are saying. Not just communication for communication, and not just exposure for exposure. And I think this matter of the views and the likes, etc., it is called in computer science, it is called or I don't know, in psychology, it is called gamification. Okay, so it's actually a kind of gamification. It's like you're collecting points, like collecting score. And the most dangerous kind of gamification is gamification that is not clearly gamification. So likes and views and subscribers are a kind of gamification. You are looking into your Facebook all the time to see how many likes. So it is bringing you back into the game. This is what it's there for. But we are not into the game for the views and the likes. We are into the game for hasanat. So yeah, I would rather focus on what brings hasanat rather than what brings views and likes. This is the whole trick, I guess.
So this next point was brought up by both David and you, I believe, during your discussion. And we discussed it earlier. You brought up here as well. So I tend to agree. So we can just move on here.
Yeah.
Now, the topic of your discussion was, basically Muslims and Christians uniting against common enemies. So your perspective was, that the atheists are at war with Muslims and Christians, so Muslims and Christians should unite against them. Now, David's position was he will unite with whoever he agrees with on whatever issue he agrees with. So if he agrees with a Muslim on an issue, he'll unite against those who disagree. If he agrees with an atheist on an issue, he'll unite against those who disagree. And I actually saw both your points, but I actually think that the greatest threat to both the Muslims and the Christians are the woke postmodernists. And I do believe that if the Muslims and the Christians are busy arguing with each other, that these groups will, well, they've already been infiltrating churches and mosques to destroy from within, and they've been using platforms, especially schools, colleges, social media, to try to suppress from without. But I also think that you can unify on issues, but still be clear on where you disagree. Like, it doesn't mean that you and I can agree on one issue and we can disagree on other issues, and I know we do. We just don't talk about the issues we disagree with as much. But we're here having this conversation. We're not focusing on the things we disagree on, right? We're focusing on the points more that we're in agreement upon.
Yeah, sure. And I think the essence of what I was saying, which I think David did not like to confirm at the end, is that there is this matter of coincidental or situational agreement on a specific point, okay, and there is the aspect of strategic alignment, okay. I think that Muslims and Christians should be strategically aligned. It does not mean that they cannot circumstantially or situationally disagree on things. And these things can be big things. So I told David, it is no secret that I am a person who believes in Tawheed, and I think that Trinity is not the right creed. But at the end of the day, both Muslims and Christians believe in God. The majority of the prophets of Christians are acknowledged by Muslims, or the important ones of them at least. Well, I will not agree that I don't know, John Smith, for example, is a prophet, but I agree that Jesus is a prophet. So at the end of the day, the strategic alignment here is we both care about family life. We care about the sanctity of houses of worship. We care about what is halal and what is haram. We care about gender roles. We care about so many things in life, to the extent that if there is really a Christian who really cares about Christianity and a Jew who really cares about Judaism in terms of his personal life, I think that the common denominators will be so great. And what the ayah says is fastabiqul khairat, race in the path of good deeds. So I think the point that I was trying to make there to David is, let's agree that we should be strategically aligned, that we are both standing for what religion stands for in terms of values and respect to family and other great institutions of the religious way of life. And we can situationally agree or disagree on other matters. It's okay. But I think he chose that, okay, I would rather go situationally agreeing rather than strategically aligning, which remains a point of further discussion. And it's an important point of discussion, I think, rather than the typical Muslim-Christian dialogue that, two people tearing each other apart about whether Muslims should say that or Christians should say the other, which I don't know, doesn't seem to make much sense to me. Yeah.
And I actually think that ties to the earlier points with brands, because I think that when people get famous, and this is not a reference to David now, I mean, it could apply to anyone. It could apply to the Dawa guys. It could apply to David. It could apply to atheist activists. It could apply to anyone is that once they get political commentators, it's once they get a brand and they're getting paid by that brand, they have to be very conscientious then, right? So if someone is tuning in to see you fight and then you fight less, you start to lose the brand, you start to lose the I mean, that's something that people have to be aware of. So I think the fact that you don't really care about a brand allows you to speak about strategic alliance.
Absolutely.
There are Muslims right now who would cancel you, because of that, right? There are Christians that would cancel him because of that. There are atheists that would cancel some of the, ex-Muslims who become atheists because of that. So it's the slippery slope when
Yeah,
religion
absolutely.
it becomes or ideology, not just religion, starts paying bills.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So now in that, David recommended to you to read Robert Spencer's books. So I just wanted to go into a little bit about, because I have read some of his books.
Oh.
So just who he is. So Robert Spencer he's a master's in religious studies, and his expertise is within the Catholic Church. He became more famous after September 11th. Now, in the United States, the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center consider his organizations to be hate groups. They're classified as hate groups. He was criticized by many Catholic dioceses due to his views on Islam and Muslims, to where many churches didn't want him speaking there. And then he ended up leaving Catholicism for Greek Orthodoxy. Now, I'm not making the claim he left for that. I don't know, what his reasoning is, or, what was in his heart. So he had written books, basically, that Muslims are trying to take over the United States of America from within, which would be very interesting if 3.5 million people could take over, 326 million.
Yeah.
And he also has a book stating, the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam did this, therefore he's evil. He did this, therefore he's false. He taught this. But then he has other books stating that the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam never existed. All right. So
yeah,
his conflict, and he's not recognized as an authority on Islam by Western academia or by Muslims. Like, a lot of his authority comes from groups who usually hate Islam or Muslims, as well as those who were supporting American invasion of Muslim countries, 10, 20 years ago. Some of his influence is starting to wane because, a lot of the American people don't want to be involved in wars anymore. I mean, unless it's unless it was something major. But the American, because, people have seen they've been lied to, about a lot of different things, from Vietnam to Iraq. Afghanistan was supposed to be quick, but
20 years quick. 20 years quick.
So America has the American people, I would say, have a lot of war fatigue. And so I would say his popularity is waning. And so, having read some of his books, this is my summary of his methodology. Is basically, Islam is pure evil. Whatever piece of data from history, scriptures, and texts that support that statement, he accepts. And whatever piece of data from history, scriptures, and texts that do not support that, he rejects or fails to report. I mean, I saw a debate with him and Muslim Dr. Javad Hashimi. And Dr. Javad Hashimi talked about how, he didn't even, he brought a point apart from his book where he didn't even quote a full verse of Quran. He quoted a portion of a verse without saying what came before it or what came after it. And, I could do the same thing, right, with the Bible. I can make the argument that David, peace be upon him, was an atheist. Why? Because in the Psalms, he does say there is no God. But he says right before it, only fools say there is no God. So if I cut out, the only fools say part, I could make the argument that David was an atheist.
Yeah, yeah, too bad.
And
Actually, I saw one of his after this dialogue with David Wood. I saw I went and through some of the material of Robert Spencer, and he was quoting an ayah completely out of context. He was saying that all what happened, beheadings, etc., is because there is an ayah in the Quran that commands Muslims to do beheadings, and he refers to this ayah where it is actually Allah is talking to the angels to punish the mushrikeen in when he sent down the angels to fight with the Muslims. So even Allah was not talking to the Muslims altogether. And he was quoting it as if this was a command to Muslims. I was really surprised that somebody who is presenting himself as an academic is doing this. Either it's an error, then somebody must correct him, or he is doing it intentionally, which will be a very regretful thing. It was so appalling. Yeah.
He's not he's not really presenting as an academic, because he's not really accepted in academia. He's more of a like a political commentator, like that writes books. And it doesn't mean 100% of everything he says is wrong, or 100% of everything he says is right. I mean, like, that's not how that's not how real life works, right? So so even like, in next slide, the other part of his message is Christianity is pure good, and whatever piece of data from history, scriptures, and texts that support this he accepts, and if they don't, he rejects or fails to report. Now, I think that works with those extremes we were talking about earlier, right? They just want people arguing and fighting. But in real life, if you're a Muslim and you read the Bible, right, you're going to find a lot of things in a Bible you agree with, and you're going to find some things you disagree with, right? And if you're a Christian and you try to read and understand the Quran, you go verse by verse, you're going to find things you agree with, and you'll find things you disagree with. So like but that doesn't sell.
Yeah.
Yeah. Honesty, unfortunately, doesn't seem to sell.
Yeah.
And so getting here, like I said, I'm not going to say 100% of what he says is right or 100% what he says is wrong, but I don't think his methodology can be trusted for the reason I stated previously. His books have inconsistent methodologies, and they're really designed just to show, Islam is bad, Christianity is good, and anything that doesn't agree with those phrases, I don't speak about. I meaning him.
Yeah. I noticed that. Yeah.
So the next point that I noticed is, as we're talking about how Islam spread. So you focused more on the spreading through trading, and he focused more on the spreading through war. That's when mentioned Spencer's books. So I actually look at it this way, that Islam did spread through war, it did spread through trade, and it spread through missionary work. So we look at, most of the Middle East and Pakistan, spread through the early Muslim wars, the wars with the Byzantines and the Persians, and the Arabs, and then eventually people of India. Now, most of West Africa and China, initially spread through trade. Now, it doesn't mean that there weren't tribes in West Africa that came, didn't come into Islam through war, but in generally it's spread through Africa and China through trade. And then most of Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, through missionary work. So, and I do think that the opponents of Islam like to just focus on the places that it spread through war. I think that some of the Muslims that go to an extreme, and it's like, Islam is all peace, love, happiness, hippie, like they'll focus only on like the trade and the missionary work, while real life and real history and real people, are usually multifaceted.
Yeah, I think you have a point here, but let me give you an example. For example, Egypt. Okay, so Egypt was occupied by Romans, for example, for quite a long period of time. Yeah, and Egyptians and even people in Levant, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, etc. There were Christians there. Okay, but guess what? They typically, for the majority of the time that the Roman Empire occupied, so when the Roman Empire was pagan and Christianity spread there, they converted to Christianity regardless of what the Roman Empire wanted. And then when Constantine came and he said, okay, now we're going to be a Christian state, etc., Egypt was, plenty of Arians were in Egypt, Unitarians primarily, or like semi-Unitarians, let's say. And it caused the Roman Empire to punish Egyptians for being Unitarian. And then when Theodosius came and the empire became, Constantine himself became a Unitarian. And then, Theodosius came and it became Orthodox. After some time, also, Egypt and the Roman Empire were at different sects. And guess what? The Romans started oppressing Christians in Egypt until the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when he wrote the message that I told David about to Caesar Hercule. And he told him, فَعَلَيْكِ إِثْمُ الْأَرِيسِيِّينَ, those Aryans, their burden is on your shoulder. So until that point, the Roman Empire was oppressing people who were not on the same sect. So the point here is, if people in Egypt and Levant did not really care about the occupier's religion, and this occupier had plenty of swords, let's say that, and a very oppressive and iron and fire kind of iron fist kind of rule. The Roman Empire was not an easy system to deal with, definitely. Then I don't think that the reason that the people of Egypt and the people of Syria and Palestine and Sham became Muslims is just because the Muslims occupied. This is not the reason. Otherwise, they would have converted to whatever religion is that was the religion of their previous occupiers. So I think, yes, there is an element of conquest. But what the conquest did is that instead of the Roman ruler of Egypt, now there is a Muslim ruler of Egypt. Instead of the Roman ruler of Lebanon and Palestine and Syria, now there is the Muslim ruler. But the people of those places really converted because they bought into Islam, as simple as that. There was no convert or die. There isn't a convert or die doctrine in Islam, definitely nothing against Christians and Jews. So they didn't even have a motive to convert. And the jizya or the tribute that the Muslims actually collected was minuscule compared to what the Romans collected. So there wasn't even a financial motive. So there is no physical coercion and there is no financial motive. So I think that even those places where the early Muslims conquered by war, it was not oppressive war, definitely, and it did not provide a good motive for the peoples of those places to convert. If they have converted because they bought the ethics and the value system and the creed, rather than just submitted to the sword of the conqueror. So I'm not sure what you think about that.
No, it makes sense.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't tell him that there has not been an element of war. Islam did go into war with Romans and Persians. I actually even mentioned the Battle of Yarmouk in our dialogue. But the point is, So I just got out of this and said, let's look when there was no war, what happened. So with and without war, people just went into Islam, and it doesn't seem that war was really a great contributor. When you look from the other side, for example, to the Ottoman Empire, for example, or the Ottoman Caliphate, and their conquests in Europe, you will find that because they did not have the approach of the early Muslims, it was war, and now we are ruling Greece, for example. You not find so many converts in Greece. Okay, so it says something that when people really applied Islam and when they went into war, people converted to Islam because they loved them, they loved their conduct, and they loved the values that they were presenting. When it was more like an empire, Mughals conquering India, Ottomans conquering parts of Europe, the effect was not the same. But even in the case of Ottomans, they did not go to people and say convert or die. So this is very clear that when Islam went to war, people converted because they bought into it. And when they did not buy, the Islamic rule did not convert them by force. So it is what it is. And I think it's very difficult for somebody to find real evidence that Islam not spread in terms of territory, but spread in terms of adherence by sword. I think it's very difficult to prove that in the general sense. Maybe glitches in history, but not in the general sense at all.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I think so we're an hour and something in. Now this is going to jump into the next. Did you want to, so we can either stop and then do another episode on this, or did you want to continue and set a time limit and we just pick up another week?
Maybe we pick it up next week, and we give your and my audience the opportunity to look into that. I'm not used to do debate reviews that much, so I think it will only capture some traction when people find it and watch it on their own time, and then they might be enticed into looking into the discussion of David and see our comments, and then look into the debate of modern day debate, and then maybe we make a follow-up on that next weekend if you would like, and invite the audience again to have a look at what we have to say. What do you think about that?
That sounds good. Can we do an hour earlier next week?
Yes, we can, inshallah. Okay. All right, so let's announce the time, and I hope everybody who watches this would enjoy a peaceful academic discussion like this one. Thank you, Faroos, very much for your insights. There's plenty of work, guys, that has gone into this presentation. You can only appreciate it when you know the complexity of those topics and a huge amount of literature that is around them. So very thankful to you, Faroos, for this great effort and very nice presentation and great insights, actually. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Jazakallahu khairan. And thanks for everyone who's watched. And please share it with other people. And let's put the extra one. If you would wait for me 1 minute after we go offline, that will be actually great.
Sure.